The camera flash reflected in the car window as I sat alone in the passenger seat, watching my husband's family arrange themselves on the front porch of their colonial home. Christmas wreaths and twinkling lights framed their perfect family portrait while I clutched my phone, pretending to be busy. "Let's keep it blood relatives only," my mother-in-law had announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 5 years of marriage to their son, and I was still an outsider. I watched through the windshield as my husband, Thomas, hesitated, glancing back at the car where I sat. For a moment, I thought he might object. Instead, he adjusted his sweater and took his place beside his brother, that familiar look of conflict crossing his face before his mother's hand on his shoulder pulled him closer to the family. "Just one quick photo," he had promised me with an apologetic smile. "Mom's got this thing about traditions." The thing about traditions was that Patricia Wilson had been creating new ones since the day Thomas and I got married. Traditions that conveniently excluded me. I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, feeling the cold seep through my holiday sweater, the one I'd carefully chosen to match the family's annual Christmas card palette of red and green. My fingertips brushed against the small gift box in my purse. Inside was the antique pocket watch I'd found for Thomas's father, Robert. I'd spent months tracking it down, an exact match to the one his grandfather had lost during the war. It had cost nearly 2 months of my teaching salary, but I'd been so certain this would be the gesture that finally made them see me as part of the family. Now the box felt heavy with foolishness. I looked up as the photographer adjusted his equipment for another shot. Patricia was rearranging everyone now. Thomas's sisters Jennifer and Rebecca, with their husbands and children grouped tightly together. My nieces and nephews, though they'd never been allowed to call me Aunt Emma. The absurdity of the situation suddenly struck me. I was a 34-year-old woman, sitting in a car like a scolded child while my husband posed with his family on Christmas Eve. The same husband who had promised 5 years ago that we would build our own family, our own traditions. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Sophia. "How's the annual Wilson family freeze-out going?" I started typing a reply when a knock on the car window startled me. It was Margaret, Thomas's grandmother, her 86-year-old frame bundled against the December chill. I quickly rolled down the window. "What on earth are you doing out here by yourself, dear?" she asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "Family photos," I explained with a smile I didn't feel. "Blood relatives only." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she looked back toward the porch, where Patricia was directing the photographer for another shot. Without a word, Margaret opened the car door. "That's absolute nonsense. Come with me." "Margaret, it's fine, really." "It most certainly is not fine," she said firmly. "I've watched this foolishness for years now, and I've had quite enough." I hesitated, not wanting to create a scene. Christmas at the Wilsons was tense enough without adding to it, but the determination in Margaret's eyes left little room for argument. With a sigh, I stepped out of the car, smoothing down my holiday sweater. Margaret linked her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. "You know, I wasn't a blood relative either when I married Robert Sr. back in 1956. My mother-in-law pulled the same nonsense until Robert put a stop to it." I blinked in surprise. In 5 years, this was the first I'd heard of any family history that mirrored my own experience. "What happened?" I asked as we slowly made our way up the path toward the porch. "Well," Margaret said with a glint in her eye, after she excluded me from their Christmas celebration the first year, "Robert went and bought us our own home. Told his mother we wouldn't be joining them for holidays until I was treated properly." As we approached, I could see Patricia's expression shift from holiday cheer to barely concealed annoyance. "Mother Wilson, what are you doing?" "We're in the middle of photos," she called out. "Yes, I can see that," Margaret replied calmly. "And I'm bringing Emma to join us, as families should." Thomas stepped forward, relief washing over his face. "That's a great idea." Patricia's smile tightened. "Mother Wilson, you know these are the blood family photos. We'll do friend photos afterward. The word friend hit like a slap. 5 years of marriage reduced to a casual acquaintance. Friend. Margaret's voice cut through the awkward silence that followed. This girl is Thomas's wife, Patricia. That makes her as much family as you or me. Patricia's cheeks flushed. Mother Wilson, we've always done photos this way. No, dear, Margaret corrected her. You've done photos this way since Thomas married Emma. Don't think I haven't noticed. The photographer shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. Robert Sr. cleared his throat. Patricia, let's just take the photo with everyone. It's fine, I said quickly, not wanting to ruin everyone's holiday. I don't mind waiting. Thomas finally found his voice. No, it's not fine. He stepped away from the group and came to stand beside me. Emma's my wife. She should be in the family photos. Patricia looked at her son, then at her husband for support. Robert Sr. simply shrugged. Thomas is right, Patricia. For a moment, I thought Patricia might actually argue. Instead, she forced another tight smile. Fine. Emma, please join us. Let's make this quick. Dinner's getting cold. Thomas squeezed my hand as he led me to the porch steps. The family rearranged themselves, creating a small space for me at the edge of the group. Not quite center, not quite family, but no longer banished to the car. Perfect, the photographer said, though it was anything but. Everyone say Merry Christmas. The chorus of holiday cheer sounded strained as the camera flashed. That night, as we prepared for bed in Thomas's childhood room, I couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my chest. The pocket watch I'd given Robert Sr. had been opened with polite appreciation, but quickly set aside in favor of the hunting gear Patricia had selected. The hand-knitted scarves I'd made for Thomas's sisters had been met with tight smiles and quick thanks before being buried under the mountain of other gifts. I'm sorry about the photo thing, Thomas said as he changed into his pajamas. Mom can be traditional. It's not tradition, Thomas. It's deliberate exclusion. The words came out more sharply than I intended. Thomas sighed, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. I know. I should have said something sooner. You shouldn't have had to say anything at all, I replied, pulling my hair into a loose bun. We've been married for 5 years. This happens every holiday, every family gathering. I'm tired of being treated like a temporary guest in your life. You're not temporary, he said, reaching for my hand. You're my wife, my family. Am I? Because it doesn't feel that way when I'm sitting in the car during family photos or being introduced as your friend to your parents' neighbors. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. What do you want me to do, Emma? Cut them off? They're my family. I'm your family too, I said quietly. At least, that's what you promised when we got married. The silence that followed felt heavier than all the Christmas decorations downstairs combined. I have something to tell you, I finally said, sitting beside him on the bed. I wasn't going to do this here, but after today... Thomas looked at me, concern replacing frustration. What is it? Are you okay? I took a deep breath. Do you remember my grandfather's house? The one in Maple Hills? He nodded. The Victorian with the wraparound porch? The one that went to your cousin after he passed? That's the one. My cousin decided to sell it. He called me last week. I paused, gathering my courage. I bought it, Thomas. His eyes widened. You what? How? We've been saving for a house, but we're nowhere near. I used my inheritance from my mother, I explained. The money I've been saving separately. It needed work, but it was a good deal. You bought a house without telling me. The hurt in his voice was palpable. I was going to surprise you after the holidays, I said. I thought it would be a fresh start for us, a place of our own. Thomas stood up, pacing the small room. Emma, we can't just move to Maple Hills. My job is here. My family is here. Your family is here, I repeated, the weight of the words settling between us. And where is my place, Thomas? In the car during family photos? At the edge of frame, always an afterthought. That's not fair, isn't it? 5 years, Thomas. 5 years of trying to be accepted by your family, of rearranging my life to fit into yours. When do I get to be more than an inconvenience to the Wilsons? He had no answer for that. The house is ours if we want it, I continued more gently. We can make it our own, build our own traditions, or I can sell it. But I need to know that we're building a life together, not just fitting me into the corners of yours. Thomas sat down again, taking my hands in his. Can we at least talk about this more before making any decisions? This is a big step. Of course, I agreed. But I need you to understand something. I can't keep doing this every year. Something has to change. As we lay in bed that night, Thomas fell into an uneasy sleep beside me. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Margaret's words, about how her husband had stood up for her all those years ago, about the house waiting for us in Maple Hills, its keys tucked safely in my purse. I thought about tomorrow's Christmas dinner, where I would once again take my place at the far end of the table, away from the family conversations, about another year of being the outsider looking in. Something would have to change. I just wasn't sure what that would be. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned with the kind of pristine snowfall that belonged on holiday cards. Thomas and I dressed in silence, the conversation from the night before hanging between us like heavy ornaments on fragile branches. As we headed downstairs, the smell of Patricia's traditional Christmas breakfast filled the house. Cinnamon rolls, bacon, and her special eggnog French toast that she made every year. The recipe that she had pointedly never shared with me, despite my admiring it annually. Merry Christmas! Patricia called out as we entered the kitchen. She was already dressed impeccably, not a strand of her silver blonde hair out of place despite the early hour. Thomas, your father needs help bringing in more firewood. Emma, you can set the table. Not a question, but an instruction. As always, as Thomas headed outside to help his father, I began laying out the holiday china, the Wilson family heirloom set that Patricia reminded me of each time I handled a piece. These plates are over 100 years old, Emma. Very delicate, very valuable. The unspoken message was always clear. You are temporary. These plates are permanent. I was carefully arranging the silverware when Patricia spoke again. I hope we can put yesterday's awkwardness behind us, she said, not looking up from the French toast she was flipping. Mother Wilson sometimes forgets how we do things in this family. Margaret was very kind, I replied evenly, continuing with my task. Kind, yes, but she doesn't understand that some traditions are important to preserve. Patricia placed another piece of toast on the growing stack. Blood family photos have been a Wilson tradition since before Thomas was born. I paused, placing the last fork with deliberate care. Interesting that the tradition only became strictly enforced after Thomas and I got married. Patricia stiffened slightly but maintained her smile. I don't know what you mean. Before I could respond, the back door opened as Thomas and his father came in carrying armloads of firewood, their cheeks ruddy from the cold. The moment for confrontation passed as quickly as it had come. Breakfast was the usual performance of Wilson family cheer. Thomas's sisters and their families arrived, the children tearing into presents while the adults exchanged polite conversation. I sat beside Thomas, nodding and smiling at appropriate intervals, while feeling increasingly invisible. It was during a lull in the gift opening that the doorbell rang. Are we expecting anyone else? Robert Sr. asked, looking up from the new fishing lures he was examining. Patricia frowned slightly. Not that I'm aware of. I'll get it, Thomas offered, setting down his coffee. A moment later, he returned with a confused expression and a large envelope in his hand. It's a courier, he said, with something for Emma. All eyes turned to me. For me? I echoed, equally puzzled. Thomas handed me the envelope. It was heavy, official-looking, with the logo of Harrison and Mills, my family's law firm. What is it? Patricia asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. I'm not sure, I replied honestly, breaking the seal. Inside was a thick document folder and a handwritten note from my cousin Michael. As I read his message, I felt a slow smile spread across my face. It's about my grandfather's house, I explained, looking up at the curious faces. The one I was telling you about last night, I added for Thomas's benefit. What house? Patricia asked sharply. I hesitated, looking at Thomas. This wasn't how I'd planned to share our potential new home with his family. Thomas nodded slightly. Emma's grandfather's house in Maple Hills. The Victorian. The deed has been officially transferred, I explained, scanning the documents. It's ours now. Yours. Patricia's voice had taken on the high, tight quality it always did when something disrupted her plans. You bought a house in Maple Hills, but that's over an hour away. It's been in Emma's family for generations, Thomas said, surprising me with his supportive tone. It's a beautiful home. Patricia turned to her son. Thomas, your job is here. Your family is here. This is your home. Actually, Thomas said slowly, I've been offered a position at Westridge Academy. It's only 20 minutes from Maple Hills. This was news to me. I stared at him in shock. You never mentioned that, Patricia said, her voice growing increasingly strained. I was going to after the holidays, Thomas replied. I haven't accepted it yet. But you're considering it? Robert Sr. asked, joining the conversation. Thomas nodded. It's a good opportunity. Better pay, smaller classes. The teaching position he'd been dreaming of for years. The one he'd mentioned in passing, but never seriously pursued because it would take him away from his family. When were you planning to tell us about all this? Patricia demanded, looking between us. We're still figuring things out ourselves, I answered, trying to keep my voice calm despite the tension building in the room. Margaret, who had been quietly watching the exchange, suddenly chuckled. Well, isn't this something? History does have a way of repeating itself. Patricia shot her a warning look, which Margaret cheerfully ignored. What do you mean? Thomas's sister Jennifer asked. Just that your father did the same thing when we got married, Margaret explained, her eyes twinkling. When my mother-in-law made it clear I wasn't welcome as family, Robert bought us our own home, started our own traditions. Robert Sr. shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mother, that was a different situation. Was it? Margaret asked innocently. I seem to recall being asked to wait in the car during family photos. She winked at me, and I couldn't help but smile back. That's completely different, Patricia insisted. We've always welcomed Emma. The blatant lie hung in the air like the artificial pine scent from the candles Patricia had strategically placed around the house. Obvious and slightly suffocating. Thomas reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I think Emma and I need to discuss some things privately. He stood, still holding my hand. If you'll excuse us. As we left the room, I could hear Patricia's urgent whispers to Robert Sr. and Margaret's unmistakable chuckle. Thomas led me upstairs to his childhood bedroom and closed the door behind us. You didn't tell me about the teaching position, I said once we were alone. And you didn't tell me you'd actually bought the house, he countered, though there was no anger in his voice. We looked at each other for a long moment before both breaking into unexpected laughter. We're really bad at communication for a couple that's been together for 7 years, I said, wiping away a tear of mirth. Thomas nodded, his smile fading into something more serious. I'm sorry, Emma. Not just about the job, but about everything. About letting my mother treat you like an outsider all these years. About not standing up for you the way I should have. Why didn't you tell me about Westridge Academy? I asked. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, I didn't think I could take it. Moving away from here, starting over, it seemed too big a step. And now, he said, looking up at me, I'm thinking that maybe it's exactly the step we need to take. I sat beside him, the deed to my grandfather's house still in my hands. Are you serious? I am, he said. Emma, I love you. You're my family, my real family, and I've been letting my mother make you feel less than that for too long. What about your job here? Your family? I can be a teacher anywhere, he said simply. And my family? Well, they'll always be my family. But that doesn't mean they get to dictate our lives or how we build our own family. I leaned my head against his shoulder, relief washing over me. The house needs work, I warned him. New plumbing, probably rewiring. Then we'll fix it up, he said. Together, make it ours. Your mother won't be happy. Thomas laughed softly. My mother hasn't been happy since 1982. It's not our job to fix that. I smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in years. So we're doing this, moving to Maple Hills. Let me officially accept the position at Westridge first, he said. But yes, I think we are. As Thomas held me, I thought about the years of feeling like an outsider of car seats during family photos and forced smiles at holiday gatherings. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine our own home, our own traditions, a place where no one would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong. Later that afternoon, as the family gathered for Christmas dinner, Thomas and I returned downstairs hand in hand. Patricia had been unnaturally quiet during the meal preparations, her usual stream of instructions reduced to necessary communications only. As we all took our seats at the dining table, me in my usual spot at the far end, Thomas suddenly spoke up. Emma should sit next to me, he said firmly. We have some news to share with everyone. Patricia's hand froze in the act of passing the mashed potatoes. News. Thomas smiled at me encouragingly as I moved to the seat beside him. I've decided to accept the position at Westridge Academy, he announced. And Emma and I will be moving into her grandfather's house in Maple Hills after the new year. The silence that followed was broken only by Margaret's delighted applause. It wasn't the Christmas I had expected, but as I looked at the shocked faces around the table and at Thomas's proud, defiant expression, I realized it was the Christmas gift I had been waiting for all along, the beginning of our own family, our own traditions, and a place where both of us truly belonged. The morning after Christmas dawned crisp and bright, sunlight glinting off fresh snow as Thomas and I packed our bags. We hadn't planned to leave the Wilson family gathering until the day after New Year's, but after last night's dinner announcement, the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. Patricia had spent the remainder of Christmas evening alternating between icy silence and passive-aggressive comments about young people's impulsive decisions and the importance of family loyalty. Robert Sr. had retreated to his study with a glass of whiskey, emerging only to ask if we were absolutely certain about our plans. Only Margaret had shown genuine happiness for us, pulling me aside after dinner to press a small velvet pouch into my hands. House keys, she'd whispered with a conspiratorial wink, to my first home with Robert. We kept it as a rental property all these years. She'd squeezed my hands with surprising strength. It's just 3 streets over from your grandfather's Victorian. Consider it my real Christmas gift to you both. Now, as I folded the last of my sweaters into our suitcase, I could hear Thomas downstairs explaining our early departure to his disappointed sisters. Their voices drifted up the stairwell. Jennifer's concerned questions, Rebecca's attempts at mediation. You don't have to leave because of Mom, Rebecca was saying. You know how she gets. That's exactly why we're leaving, Thomas replied, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard him speak to his sisters. Emma's been putting up with how Mom gets for 5 years now. We're done. I smiled to myself, zipping the suitcase closed. This was a new Thomas, one who stood his ground instead of seeking the path of least resistance, one who recognized that family loyalty ran in multiple directions. A soft knock on the bedroom door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting one of Thomas's sisters. Instead, Patricia entered, her posture rigid with restraint. She closed the door behind her and stood awkwardly near the dresser, fingers tracing the edge of the antique wood. "My mother gave us this dresser when we got married," she said after a moment of uncomfortable silence. "Family heirloom. 5 generations of Wilsons." I nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "It's beautiful." "Thomas says you're leaving today." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Yes. We thought it might be better given the tension." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see." She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard where Thomas and his father were loading bags into our car. "That Victorian will need a lot of work." "Old houses always do. Probably asbestos in the walls. Lead paint." "We've had it inspected," I replied, keeping my own voice even. "It needs updating, but the structure is sound." Patricia nodded absently, still watching her son through the window. "Thomas has always been impulsive, even as a child, jumping into decisions without thinking them through." I bit back a sharp retort. Thomas was many things, but impulsive wasn't one of them. If anything, his reluctance to rock the boat had kept us trapped in this dysfunctional family dynamic for years. "This isn't an impulsive decision," I said instead. "It's something we've both wanted for a long time. A place of our own." Patricia turned to face me, her expression suddenly vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "You're taking him away from his family." There it was, the heart of the matter. "No," I said gently. "I'm not taking Thomas away from his family. I'm asking to be treated as part of that family instead of an outsider." "You've always been welcome here," she insisted, the familiar defensiveness returning to her tone. "Have I?" I asked quietly. "Waiting in the car during family photos? Being introduced as Thomas's friend after 5 years of marriage? Having my Christmas gifts set aside to open later while everyone else opens theirs?" Patricia flushed. "That's not. We have traditions. Traditions that changed the moment Thomas and I got married," I pointed out. "Traditions specifically designed to keep me at arm's length." She didn't deny it, which was more honesty than I'd expected. "He's my only son," she said instead, her voice small. "And he's my husband. Those things don't have to be in conflict." Patricia smoothed invisible wrinkles from her perfectly pressed slacks. "What do you want from me, Emma? An apology? Some grand gesture of acceptance?" "I wanted that 5 years ago," I admitted. "Now I just want to build a life with Thomas where we both feel valued, where we can create our own traditions while still honoring the ones that matter to both of our families." "Both families," Patricia repeated slowly, as if testing the concept. "Yes, both. My parents might be gone, but I still have family traditions that matter to me. Things I'd like to pass down someday." I hesitated, then added, "to our children." Patricia's head snapped up. "Are you pregnant?" The hopeful note in her voice almost made me laugh. 5 years of treating me like an unwanted house guest, and the prospect of a grandchild instantly changed everything. "No," I said, "but someday we hope to have children. And when we do, I want them to know both sides of their family, to feel welcome in both homes." Patricia nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the window. Thomas and his father appeared to be having an intense conversation beside our packed car. "Robert's mother never accepted me," she said suddenly. "Did you know that? 23 years of marriage, and she never once called me by my name. Always Thomas's mother or Robert's wife. Never Patricia." I stared at her in surprise. I didn't know. "Margaret thinks she's so righteous," Patricia continued, a bitter edge to her voice. "Standing up for you like that. But she watched it happen for years. Only spoke up when it was convenient for her little, dramatic moment. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, meaning it despite everything. "That must have been painful." Patricia's laugh was hollow. I swore I'd never be like her, that I'd be different when Thomas married. She shook her head, and here we are. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Outside, Robert Sr. clasped his son's shoulder before heading back toward the house. We're not moving to get away from you, I said finally. We're moving to build something of our own. Patricia nodded, though whether in understanding or resignation wasn't clear. She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. The French toast recipe, she said without turning around. The one you've asked about every Christmas. Yes. It's not a family secret. It's just regular French toast soaked in eggnog instead of milk. A pause. I'll email you the proportions. With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. It wasn't an apology, nor was it full acceptance. But it was something, a small crack in the wall she'd built between us. A beginning, perhaps. As we drove away from the Wilson family home an hour later, Thomas reached across the console to take my hand. You okay? He asked, glancing at me before returning his eyes to the snow-covered road. I think so, I replied, watching the familiar houses of his childhood neighborhood recede in the side mirror. Your mom and I had an interesting conversation before we left. Really? About what? French toast, mostly, I said with a small smile. And family traditions. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That sounds cryptic. It was surprisingly honest, actually. I think we might have reached a tiny understanding. Thomas said, not sounding convinced. Well, it's a start, I guess. A small one, I agreed. But right now, I'm more interested in the future than the past. Tell me more about this teaching position you never mentioned. As Thomas described the opportunity at Westridge Academy, the smaller class sizes, the focus on arts integration, the autonomy he'd never been given at his current school, I watched the scenery shift from suburban orderliness to rural panoramas. Somehow, the physical distance from the Wilson family home already made breathing easier. We hadn't planned to visit the Victorian that day, but as we approached the Maple Hills exit, Thomas flipped on his turn signal. Want to see our house? He asked, a grin spreading across his face as he emphasized the word our. My heart skipped. Really? You're sure? Absolutely. I want to see this place that's going to be our home. The Victorian stood at the end of a tree-lined street, its blue-gray, paint fading in places, but its bones still proud and strong. Snow blanketed the wraparound porch where my grandfather had taught me to play chess during summer visits. Icicles hung from the ornate eaves like crystal decorations. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a curious mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. This place had been part of my childhood, filled with memories of my grandparents. Now it would become something new, the beginning of our own family story. It's even more beautiful than the photos, Thomas said as we stepped out of the car. Those dormers, the gingerbread trim, they don't make houses like this anymore. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling slightly with excitement as I unlocked the front door. The house had been empty since my grandfather's passing 3 years earlier, my cousin using it only occasionally as a weekend retreat. The interior was dusty but full of potential. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a grand staircase curving up to the second floor. Sunlight streamed through stained glass transoms, casting jewel-toned patterns across the entry hall. It needs work, I warned, running my fingers along the vintage wallpaper in the foyer. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, probably rewiring. It's perfect, Thomas said, his voice filled with quiet awe as he took in the craftsmanship of the century-old home. Absolutely perfect. We wandered from room to room, Thomas growing more excited with each new discovery. The built-in bookshelves in the library, the bay window in the dining room, the third-floor turret that would make an ideal office for grading papers. I can see us here, he said as we stood in the master bedroom that overlooked the sprawling backyard. I can see our whole life here, Emma. I leaned against his shoulder, his arm automatically wrapping around my waist. "Even though it's an hour from your family?" "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said with a wry smile. "A little distance might actually help." "And Margaret's rental property is just 3 streets over," I added. Thomas laughed. "Grandmother to the rescue. Mom's going to hate that." "It doesn't have to be a competition," I said gently. "There's room in our lives for all of your family, just on slightly different terms than before." Thomas nodded, pulling me closer. "You're right. And speaking of family—" He hesitated, looking suddenly nervous. "What is it?" "Well, this house has 4 bedrooms," he began. "That's a lot of space for just the 2 of us." My heart quickened. "Thomas Wilson, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" He turned to face me fully, taking both my hands in his. "I know we've been putting it off, waiting for the right time, the right place. But being here, seeing this house, imagining our life together—" He squeezed my hands. "I think I'm ready. If you are." Tears pricked at my eyes. We'd talked about children since before our wedding, but something had always held us back. Financial concerns, career timing, and if I was honest with myself, my reluctance to bring a child into the complicated dynamic with Thomas's family. "A baby," I whispered. Thomas nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A baby. Maybe even 2 or 3 eventually. This place has plenty of room for a proper Wilson-Taylor clan." "Wilson-Taylor," I repeated, loving the sound of our joined names. Not just Wilson, as his mother always addressed cards and gifts, deliberately omitting my family name. "So, what do you think?" Thomas asked, suddenly looking uncertain. "Too soon? We should probably get settled first, I know, but—" I cut him off with a kiss. "I think," I said against his lips, "that this is the best Christmas gift you could have given me." As evening approached, we reluctantly locked up the Victorian and headed to a nearby hotel. We'd need to return home to pack up our apartment, and Thomas would need to give notice at his current school. But neither of us wanted to go back to the Wilson family Christmas gathering. After checking in, we found a small family-owned restaurant for dinner. Over pasta and wine, we began making plans: which rooms to renovate first, how to blend my grandfather's antiques with our more modern furniture, which of the 4 bedrooms would become the nursery. Blue or yellow, Thomas mused. Gender neutral, since we won't know for a while. "The room with the morning sun," I suggested. "The one that overlooks the garden." Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect. And we can convert the small bedroom next to ours into a study." My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Then another, and another. "Popular tonight," Thomas observed as I pulled it from my purse. 3 messages from Patricia, which was 3 more than she'd ever sent me in 5 years of marriage. The first: "I hope you arrived safely wherever you're staying tonight." The second: "Robert says the Victorian has good bones, but you should check the foundation for settling issues. Common in houses that age." The third, sent just seconds ago: "I saved your gifts from the family, and I have some baby items in the attic that might be useful someday, if you want them." I stared at my phone in disbelief. "What is it?" Thomas asked, concern creasing his brow. Wordlessly, I handed him my phone. His eyebrows rose higher with each message. "Baby items," he echoed, looking up at me. "Did you say something to her about our conversation?" "No," I said, still processing this unexpected development. "But I did mention children in the abstract. I never thought she'd offer family heirlooms." Thomas finished, equally stunned. "That's progress, I guess." I took back my phone, rereading the messages. Should I respond now? Thomas considered for a moment. "Maybe wait until tomorrow. Give both of you some space to think." I nodded, setting the phone aside. "It's strange. For 5 years, I've been fighting for a place in your family. Now that we're making our own space, suddenly there's an opening." "Mom hates feeling left out," Thomas said, taking a sip of his wine. "She always has. Maybe the reality of us having our own place, making our own decisions, finally sank in. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe it was seeing her own mother-in-law's behavior reflected in hers. We finished our meal discussing happier topics, names we liked, whether to plant a vegetable garden in the spring, how soon Thomas could interview in person at Westridge Academy. As we walked back to the hotel through gently falling snow, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. We were building something new together, something that was entirely ours, yet still connected to both our pasts. You know, Thomas said as we passed a row of shops decorated for the holidays, we should start our own traditions, things that are just for our family. I'd like that, I replied, squeezing his hand. What did you have in mind? Well, for starters, I think family photos should include everyone who's family, by blood, marriage, or choice, he said firmly. No one waits in the car. I laughed, leaning into his shoulder. Definitely. What else? Christmas morning pajamas, he suggested. Everyone gets a new pair on Christmas Eve. Matching ones, maybe. Ridiculously festive. I can see you in reindeer flannel already, I teased. Hey, I would rock reindeer flannel, he protested with mock indignation. As we continued down the snowy sidewalk, trading increasingly silly holiday tradition ideas, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come in just 2 days. From me sitting alone in a car watching the real family take photos, to planning our own family traditions in a home that belonged to us. The next morning, I finally replied to Patricia's texts. We're safe, staying at a hotel in Maple Hills. Thank you for the foundation advice. We'll have it checked. And yes, we'd love to see the baby item someday. Maybe next time we visit. Her response came faster than I expected. Next time. Yes, that would be fine. Not exactly warm, but not the icy resistance I'd grown accustomed to either. Thomas read the exchange over my shoulder. Small steps, he said, kissing the top of my head. Small steps, I agreed. Over the next 6 months, those small steps continued. Thomas resigned from his teaching position and was officially hired at Westridge Academy. We sold our apartment and moved into the Victorian, beginning the slow process of renovations. Margaret visited often, bringing homemade casseroles and stories about the house's history in the neighborhood. Patricia and Robert Sr. maintained their distance at first, communicating primarily through brief texts and occasional calls to Thomas. But as spring turned to summer, a tentative thaw began. It started with a package delivered to our door, a box of old photographs of the Wilson family in and around Maple Hills. My grandparents lived here in the 1950s, Patricia explained when Thomas called to thank her. Just a few blocks from your place, actually. Next came emails with links to local contractors Patricia had researched for our renovation projects. Then an invitation to Sunday dinner. Nothing formal, just family, which we cautiously accepted. The dinner was awkward but civil, with Patricia making visible efforts to include me in conversations. She even asked about my teaching job and seemed genuinely interested in my response. By midsummer, when I discovered I was pregnant, the foundation for a new kind of relationship had been established. Not warm, not close, but respectful in a way it had never been before. When we shared our news, Patricia's reaction surprised me most of all. I hope you'll consider using my mother's name if it's a girl, she said after the initial congratulations. Elizabeth. She was quite remarkable. That's my mother's name, too, I replied, momentarily stunned by this unexpected connection. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Is it really? Well, perhaps it's meant to be then. A week later, a delivery truck brought a carefully restored antique crib to our door. The card read simply, Elizabeth's crib. For your Elizabeth, should you choose that name. Patricia. Wow, Thomas said as we examined the beautiful cherrywood piece. I think this is the first time she's ever signed just her name to you instead of Thomas's mother. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, thinking about the generations of Wilson babies who had slept in this crib. Now our child, a Wilson Taylor, would continue that tradition, while starting entirely new ones. That Christmas, 1 year after I'd sat alone in the car watching the blood relatives only photo session, we hosted the holiday gathering at our Victorian home. The renovations weren't completely finished, but the main rooms shone with fresh paint and restored woodwork. A towering pine tree filled the front bay window, decorated with ornaments from both our families. My due date was still 2 months away, but my rounded belly was prominently displayed in the matching pajamas Thomas had insisted we all wear for Christmas Eve, red and green plaid flannel with white trim. "Everyone," Thomas announced, gathering the family in front of the fireplace. "Time for photos." Patricia, wearing the matching pajamas we'd sent her with only minimal protest, stepped toward the grouped chairs we'd arranged. "Should I take the picture?" she asked, reaching for the camera. "No," I said firmly. "You should be in it. Everyone should be in it." Margaret, also resplendent in plaid flannel despite her initial horror at the concept, nodded approvingly. "Family photos include all family," she stated, giving Patricia a pointed look. Patricia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, of course. All family." As the photographer we'd hired adjusted his equipment, Thomas and I took our places in the center of the group. His family arranged themselves around us, not with us at the edges, not with me as an afterthought, but with us at the heart of the gathering. "Everyone say Merry Christmas," the photographer called. As we all responded with holiday cheer, I felt the baby kick decisively, as if adding her own voice to the family chorus. Thomas felt it too, his hand resting on my belly, and the smile he gave me was full of promise. The camera flashed, capturing the moment, not perfect, not without its complications, but genuine. A real family with all its flaws and potential. A family that was still finding its way forward, still creating its story. Later that night, after the last guests had gone to bed in our various spare rooms and guest quarters, Thomas and I stood in the completed nursery. Moonlight filtered through the hand-sewn curtains Margaret had made, illuminating the Wilson family crib that now held a new handmade quilt. A gift from Patricia, who had apparently been taking sewing classes in secret for months. "I never thought we'd get here," I admitted as Thomas wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands cradling my rounded belly. Last Christmas, sitting in that car, I felt so alone. "Never again," Thomas promised, his chin resting on my shoulder. "No one in our family waits in the car. Ever." "No one waits in the car," I repeated, feeling our daughter kick in agreement. As we stood there in the moonlight, I thought about the journey of the past year, from exclusion to belonging, from endurance to empowerment. The road hadn't been straight or easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. Patricia was trying, but decades of habits wouldn't change overnight. Yet something fundamental had shifted. In choosing our own path, in creating our own home and traditions, we'd not only found our place, but had somehow made space for everyone else too. The deed to this house had been more than a property transfer. It had been the beginning of a new family story, one where everyone belonged, where no one waited in the car, where traditions evolved to embrace rather than exclude. As if reading my thoughts, Thomas whispered, "Merry Christmas, Emma. Welcome home." Home. Not just a house, but a place of belonging. A place where family meant everyone without exception. I turned in his arms to face him, this man who had finally found the courage to stand up for our family, for me, for himself, for the daughter we would soon welcome. "Merry Christmas, Thomas," I whispered back. And yes, finally, we're home.